You are walking down a dimly lit hall. Flickering torches and sconces every 10 feet are the only light providing the way to the library. You walk down the hall and open the library door. A musty scent of mildew assaults your nostrils as you enter. There, beneath a candelabra, sitting on a single table, there is a book. Do you approach it? Do you approach it, Scott?
Well, first I want to check for traps.
Okay, you check for traps. There's no traps. Do you approach the book?
I approach the book.
You approach the book. It is the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Do you open it, Mr. Bruner?
I've heard that there were spells that could raise demons in that book, but yes, I will.
So, for those of you who are totally new to us, we have been, for believe it or not, 4 years, Scott, reading aloud from the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. And we are today on page 38, so we're averaging less than 10 pages per year. We are hoping to change that with this podcast by getting something out every week. So hopefully we will begin to make more progress in the book. Although we've been enjoying reading it so much, it's hard to say that it's progress or work, even for that matter, because it's just such a delight to sit down with you over this text once a week, Scott.
I think the old saying is that time flies when you're reading disease and henchman charts.
So, couple things I want to throw in here before we really get into it. One, we have obviously soft launched this podcast. You know, there's all sorts of things that maybe aren't the way they're going to be when everything is fixed and done. But you know what? The podcast is available. You can listen to it. We have a very bare bones Patreon up for $3 a month, and we're just asking for $3 a month. You know, like less than the cost of a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Um, for $3 a month, you can join our Discord. For those of you who have come to us fleeing the Plot Points Discord, I will note that I will actually participate in this one. I promise. I hate Discord, but you know what? I also hate social media, and I do that all the time. So I'm kind of thinking I'm going to take the social media energy I've been using and put it into Discord, where at least people are definitely interested. And hey, if you're going to pay $3 a month, you might as well get to hear about what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, not that we probably wanted to discuss about social media. We talk about so many things in general. It's interesting to me that you don't like Discord so much when I've never been, yeah, I don't even know what Instagram, Facebook, all those channels, not on them, don't ever look at them. And yet I've always loved Discord so much. Maybe because it reminds me of, I mentioned this to you personally, but it always reminds me of like chatting on the early internet in the 1990s. Plus, it's so much fun to get real time responses from fans and listeners to the podcast.
And I get,
Um, yeah.
sorry, go ahead. I
No,
can certainly see that analogy. It's just that I find it so unintuitive and
hmm.
so like it feels like wielding a double-handed bastard sword or something. Like, what do you want me to do with this large, unwieldy piece of metal that I'm using both hands and all my upper body strength to turn and yeah, I'm supposed to be fleet of foot with this? Ah.
Do
Yeah, and again,
you?
I
Yeah.
do generally loathe social media. I just feel like I have to be on social media.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate thing. But to to
Do
get
you,
back, good. So you go.
I do have a question for you, which is, obviously, do you run or play in any games that use virtual tabletops?
No,
Have you ever?
virtual tabletops, like once or twice.
That's so interesting to me. It's interesting to me because, and I'd be curious. Again, this is a question for those of you who have recently subscribed to the Patreon. $3 can now talk. Not like making this like a choose your own adventure. If you would like to comment on what Ben has just said, give us $3 and jump on the Discord. But what I was
Ah,
going to say is, so many of my games now. I mean, I run. Well, it's actually about no. I run more games at virtual tabletops than I do, in person. And it's been interesting because I'm running Curse of Strahd now in person, and I've been reminded how much I prefer running in person. At the same time, virtual tabletops are so great because my long running, it's actually weird. We've taken a break from 2E, and we've been running old school essentials. We've been running Winter's Daughter to prep for GaryCon. Which I also, oh, by the way, I also ran with some Plot Points listeners. And should thanks to everyone who participate in that game. That was really, really, really helpful. But long story short, it's interesting to me because I can get to play with, geez, now I sound like a Roll20 ad. There's no sponsorships yet, though we're open to sponsorships. Is that I don't know why I keep doing that voice. Yeah, anyway, what was
The
I talking
bedroom
about?
voice,
Yeah,
Scott's bedroom voice.
that's how I talk to people when it comes to money.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's a footnote. It's the old David Foster Wallace footnote every time I do that. Well, this is the first time I'm using this enormous mic, so now I have like a prop in front of me that I want to use. But what were we talking about? Virtual tabletops. They allow me to play with, friends the folks that I play with in my long running game. One of them is one of my best friends in California. One of them is my best friend from high school in Detroit. You've got a teacher from Vancouver, and a person from South Carolina, and a person from San Jose as well. And it's interesting, and I know that's not the point of the show, but wherever we're thinking about other shows, it's amazing how Roll20 is, and I don't just mean in my games or even the way that I think about role-playing games, but how it's changing role-playing games as a whole. If for no other reason, like every time a new tabletop role-playing game or module comes out, they now have to release them with like unkeyed maps because they know people are going to be copying the PDFs and pasting them into the maps on Roll20. It should Anyway, a topic for another time. But I think one of the reason I'm talking about this is the reason that I know Discord so well is that that's what everybody uses for the virtual tabletop games, right? For whatever reason, we never use Roll20's sound feature, I guess, because it's kind of buggy. And Discord has always been here. So I've gotten, yeah, I can understand your point about parts of it being slightly unintuitive. But of course, just like anything, once you use it enough, you figure it out. It's strange little foibles.
So I will further mention that I'm working on another book. I thought my
Woohoo!
next book was going to be about like third edition, fourth edition, and Pathfinder. Now I think that my next book is going to be about the last 10 years of Dungeons and Dragons history. That time was kind of a dark spot. I just didn't have resources for it for what I do. Like uh obviously like Legends and Lore came out, and that's the two Whitwers, Newman and Peterson, and it was published by Wizards of the Coast, and it's kind of a 5e history. But it's published by Wizards of the Coast, and even though those guys are great historians, obviously it's I hope they would not be offended at me saying uh it is obviously Wizards of the Coast's best version of events. Um
Yeah, yeah, that's
I
a great.
hope again, I hope that they would not take offense to me saying that. And if they do, I apologize. But again, what I do is very different from that. I need people to tell me where the bodies are buried, tell me all the dirt, tell me the truth about what happened, or at least the truth as they see it, and then I get other people's truths and I put it all in a book. And that is definitely happening right now because of the layoffs in December. They laid off so many people from the D&D team that I can really start writing one of those books. And yeah, we'll see where that goes. But I've interviewed Ray Winninger, Chris Lindsay. I'm going to be interviewing Mike Merles this coming week on the creation of 5e. Looks like I'm going to get Nathan Stewart, who, as I recall, was the head of D&D from 2012 to 2019. Um, and again, that's just the beginning, because one of my things is I try and talk to everyone, right? Uh, so it looks like there's a book there, and people keep telling me exciting things, and I am promising myself that after interviews, I'm going to go talk about them on Discord. So, if you want little hints, that is the place to be. All right, that was
Can I?
enough of. Oh, and if you don't have my current book, Slaying the Dragon, please go get it. Slaying the Dragon: A Secret History of D&D, about the fall of TSR. Scott.
I really quickly just wanted to jump on the back of the. Well, first of all, not only is Slaying Dragon available in your local bookstores and of course on your local Amazon retailer, but also I read it way back when, and then I listened to it on Audible, and I thought the Audible recording was really well done as well. It's always interesting to think. I always think of the entire time as the actor, and I'm so sorry that I can't remember the gentleman's name. My apologies on that
I'll
one.
look it up right now because I can't
Yeah.
remember either.
But I always wonder what those folks are thinking about because I did Game Wizards on Audible as well, and I'm always thinking about like what the actors are thinking about because I don't want to assume that they don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, but certainly in the weeds that both your and Peterson's books go to the legs, I can imagine actors are like, what this game, these people are writing these enormous tomes about this really fascinating game. But I wanted to jump on the lore and legends and lore. Let's not confuse the two, because one is a book of deities and the other one is a well, what I was going to say about it is it very much feels like a piece of like 5e marketing. And again, reinforcing what you said, both of us have a lot of respect for both of Whitworth Newman and certainly John Peterson, who has, been an amazing beacon of historical accuracy on the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. The thing that I find interesting about L and L, I want to make sure I don't confuse it with the old TSR book, is how everything in that book about how well 5e was designed and how they were taking into, how they were thinking about maintaining the legacy of Dungeons and Dragons, but also innovating in some ways and coming up with game mechanics that wouldn't feel like they were at odds with Dungeons and Dragons. Not that I'm talking about any other edition, fourth. But what's amazing about that book is now in 2024, as we noted about the layoffs that you're mentioning, and how the Wizards of the Coast has done such an amazing job of turning away the community with the OGL fiasco and everything. It completely turns the L&L book into a different thing. You're like, this is your roadmap to what you should have continued to doing. What are you doing now? Why are you not learning the lessons of the last 10 years, right? I imagine this is all going to be in your book.
Well, hey, this is a new podcast. I'm writing a new book. Let's talk about that for a minute because there's an
Sure.
answer. There is a very clear and distinct answer.
I believe, before you tell me the real answer, that Dungeons and Dragons monetization is cursed, that somebody has put a Mordenkainen spell of you'll never make money from this thing. And until somebody breaks the spell, nobody's ever going to make money from Dungeons and Dragons, except for
So,
us.
so here is what has occurred. Um, again, I'm speaking from memory here, so dates I may make some mistakes. But my recollection is that it was in 2022 that Cynthia Williams was hired as the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, and her predecessor, Chris Cox, was promoted from uh, Wizards of the Coast CEO to Hasbro CEO, which at the time, I think all of us were like, "Oh, wow, like the guy who ran WotC is now going to run Hasbro. This is kind of like Hasbro Wizards conquering Hasbro to some degree." And Cynthia Williams, you look at her resume and it's like, okay, I want to say, as I recall, she was most recently at Microsoft. You're like, okay, you're hiring a Microsoft exec to run Wizards of the Coast. Okay, seems fine. But the missing context, ironically, was Amazon. Apparently, Cynthia Williams is much more of an Amazon person than a Microsoft person. And once she arrived at Wizards, she began hiring, uh, I'm going to say large numbers, but that could be less than six. Um, she begins hiring other former Amazon people. The Amazon people who come on board at Wizards of the Coast have almost no respect at all for the way things were previously done, um, and are confident that they, simply by being there, by virtue of being the Amazon people, are going to take D&D and make it into $1 billion brand. They are just going to descend upon the brand. They're going to shake their special fairy dust all over the brand, and it will ascend. Uh, and again, there's no respect for the way things were previously done. There's no respect for decades of experience that some members of the D&D brand team had by that point. Uh, and that this is the one of the core problems at the root of what has happened to D&D in the past couple of years. Because again, like if you look at the way things were up until the OGL crisis, you'd be like, okay, yeah, D&D has done a couple weird things here and there. Man, they sure keep letting racist stuff somehow slip out of their processes. I wonder what's up with that. Um, and yeah, maybe this campaign book could have been better play tested. Da, 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 da. But TSR put out lots of stuff that was substandard. Like it happens. It just happens. But man, since the announcement of the new edition and the OGL crisis, it's just been weird. It has been very, very weird. And Again, one of those weirdnesses is firing all of these people in the winter of 2023, right before Christmas. And it seems to be the core struggle behind all of it is these Amazon people who are now essentially in charge, um, not listening to the D&D people with decades of experience. Again, a lot of those D&D people with decades of experience are now gone. Um, so whatever we get, it's not going to be like uh, Liz Shu was a guiding hand of D&D since third edition, and she was fired this past December. Chris Lindsay, again, he had been at Wizards in some capacity since I want to say third or 3.5, got fired this past December. Um, and again, I am just very leery and very worried about what is going to happen because essentially the story of the past 10 years is these people who know D&D really well are kind of empowered to put out an edition the way it should be put out. Um, Third edition, Peter Adkison kind of had a vision for it. In many ways, I think third edition is a culmination of first edition. And when we read the DMG, um, third edition is actually the logical endpoint of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Fourth edition, the D&D team was told, make something that will appeal to World of Warcraft players. And they did. And again, it's an interesting, fun game, but you can argue all day long about is it truly D&D. Fifth edition, my current understanding is, although I'll know more soon, that the team was finally given time and space to kind of do what they think is best, to make a classic edition of D&D, an evergreen edition of D&D. And again, they made the best edition of D&D since 1980, in my humble opinion. Um, and because they I shouldn't say finally, because they generated this kind of most D&D of D&D editions. And because that was then picked up by Critical Role. I love the one of my favorite facts is Critical Role started out playing Pathfinder and they switched
Yeah,
to fifth edition.
sure.
Um, so for all the people that are like, "Oh, Critical Role is the reason that D&D is big," well, they chose D&D 5e. Um, if that game wasn't good, maybe Pathfinder would have had a really different last 10 years. Anyway, and again, they did just get lucky with Stranger Things and the Duffer Brothers. Uh, and you could argue that D&D at least got lucky with the pandemic because it forced people into their arms. But still, at the base of all this, there's a really good edition of the game produced by people that were knowledgeable about the brand and knowledgeable about the game. And once the game finally got big enough, the response of Wizards of the Coast was, "You can all leave." Um, it's almost a theme with Dungeons and Dragons where the people who make editions of the game are fired or let go from the company, forced out. Some have the wisdom to leave, but there's very little respect at the company, it seems, once you've generated a good edition of D&D. And it's just crazy to me that the team that made D&D bigger than it's ever been, at the end of the day, is forced out, fired, and it's hard not to say disrespected, based on some of the stories I am hearing. I'm really looking forward. This week, I'm going to talk to a guy named Nathan Stewart, who, again, as I recall, ran D&D from 2012 to 2019. You could argue that the D&D movie was his doing, and that is going to be a high point in the history of D&D forever. We finally got a good D&D movie, and my understanding is he left for Blizzard. And that Wizards wouldn't even make him an offer when he was leaving. Like, oh, you're leaving for Wizards for more money, for Blizzard for more money. That's fine, you can go. Which to me is just nuts. Okay, I don't know. Was that too long? Was that okay?
No, I think that's fantastic. And
Okay,
again, I mean, that's the wheelhouse of your experience. And all this stuff is extremely fascinating to me because obviously you do have had an opportunity to talk a lot about these folks. The thing that there's two things, of course, that I want to quickly say, and that is like, again, you bringing up this concept that, there's the old phrase of, those who don't know the past are destined to continue to not find a way to monetize Dungeons and Dragons. And it's just fascinating that no lessons seem to be learned, and it seems so unbelievable. For those of you who do know their history of TSR and are Slaying the Dragon fans, and Game Wizards as well. Those two books I think are extremely complementary. To think about, and not only complementary, but boy, the themes just run through both of those books so much around folks just kind of unsure what to do with Dungeons and Dragons and the different personalities and how human entanglement with this kind of strange practice of play, nobody quite knows what to do with it. I did, and the other thing is, can you think of, and this was a question, I just a bit of a rhetorical question, but I'm curious, can you think of another a game or product or book or any type of practice that's not just the practice itself, that when people think about it, when people try to understand how they feel about it, what their affective response is to it, like Dungeons and Dragons isn't just a product. It isn't necessarily, and in some ways, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud, but it's funny because I'm thinking about you because you threw World of Warcraft into my mind, and I think about how that game in many ways is also very much entangled with its community. That one seems to struggle on, despite its in many often its designers worst, not designers, but the folks running the company's worst intentions. But though Blizzard has laid off so many employees of folks that were that have been around for forever and never quite kind of struggled exactly recapture that magic that was early 2000s World of Warcraft. But my question to you, Ben, before we move on, is can you think of another game that is not just the game, right? That to purchase a book from Wizards of the Coast requires like people now talk about, I won't buy any more Wizards of the Coast products. And there's lots of things that we hold our nose and buy often, or we don't even care who makes them. But when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, like there's literally an act, we actually have to know that the person selling it to us, designing it and manufacturing it and printing it to us is like us or has our interests in mind, or is a no more that they're like a member of the community, right? Like we have an emotional, affective, embedded commitment to this game, and we expect the people that make it to have that same thing, or we won't, or at least we'll say we won't, and then of course we do. Can you think of any other game that endears such a commitment to its like entire ecosystem?
I mean, I think part of this has to do with D&D being so new. Like, do you know who invented poker?
No.
Me neither. Um,
Right.
but I'm guessing if we were closer to the invention of poker, we'd be like, oh yeah, Bob's card game. Like yeah, we know Bob. He taught us this game. Um, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that we are still close to the beginning of the role-playing game.
Sure.
Um, secondly, again, it is we call it a game. The thing I say all the time, it is actually a radical new medium, and we are still exploring the impacts of it. Um, and I cannot off the top of my, I mean, it certainly seems like, man, the people who like Skyrim really like Skyrim, and will go on at length about Skyrim. I do think that games inspire this kind of loyalty. I mean, the guy who wrote the Super Mario Brothers theme song was just inducted, I think, into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. This 78-year-old guy flew over from God, Nintendo, it had to be Kyoto. So he flies over from Kyoto to Las Vegas to be inducted into this Hall of Fame for songwriters. Um, again, I think that games are being recognized as a cultural medium in general, more akin to that of at least literature,
Yeah,
or movies or something like that. So yeah, I mean, like the fact that we're going to a convention named after the guy who co-created D&D,
yeah.
yeah, it seems to be of a piece with just what's happening in culture as games are rising. Is Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think I think you bring up good things, and in making the wheels in my mind slowly turn on this spring forward morning, which is that we talk about Nintendo, and certainly people, my gosh, if you think about Nintendo iconography in 2024, like there's not a human being alive that doesn't know who Super Mario is, what those kind of, the entire, like, yeah, all of those characters that Nintendo, voices on. And yet I feel like a lot of folks that are giant, enormous fans of Nintendo, uh, often buy those products in spite of Nintendo. I mean, Nintendo is terrible. Like one of the things I loathe about Nintendo is how I always have to buy Super Mario Brothers, for the 47,000th time to pick up my Switch, and I had my Wii U, but now I've got to buy the system again because like they can't have that library just moving forward. But the thing that I was thinking about is unlike Nintendo, where they can make all of those games that you have to buy them again because the only way to play it on the Switch because we own the technology with. And this is my warning out there to Wizards of the Coast. This is what you have to be careful of, and you've already stepped in it rather significantly. What we have in tabletop role playing games, and what we have because they've become so popular within the last 10 years, is an extremely large modding community. Perhaps the Skyrim analogy is not bad, except that to play Skyrim, no matter how many mods you put on it, you must have the original version of Skyrim. Now, what Wizards of the Coast is now facing is that lots of people don't need, if they want to go off and make the MCDM, or they want to go and make um, Shadow Dark or whatever they can make, they don't have to have the initial software because it's all been installed in our brains. The practice of tabletop role-playing games is now completely embedded and entangled with what that practice has now been taught to everyone. So now Wizards of the Coast is in a really tough position that if you push the community away, they can make their own games, right?
Well, and this is what I mean, to a degree, TSR struggled with this, and they tried to deal with it through litigation,
Hmm.
um, and were unsuccessful. And Wizards of the Coast acknowledged it and tried to seize upon it through the open gaming license. And that is, again,
But that's the
last
Skyriming. They were trying to say, hey, we own the base software that you must have. And that was obviously an enormous mistake.
so well, that we could talk about for hours and hours. But let's just
Yeah, sorry.
take it. That's okay. Let me just say this. At Gen Con last year, I did an OGL seminar, and Lynn Kodega and Ryan Dancy did an OGL seminar, and there was a lawyer whose name escapes me, and I really regret that I can't remember his name. There was a lawyer who did a seminar called "Why You Never Needed the OGL in the First Place," and his whole contention was that essentially nothing that you would call Dungeons and Dragons, except the rule books themselves, is Dungeons and Dragons. You can, in fact, sit down and even without the OGL, make a game where people have strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, intelligence, charisma, and you're rolling 3d6. You can take all those D&D rules and put them in a different rule book, and it becomes legal because rules are not copyrightable. And
Yeah.
only the words, only the expression of the rules is copyrightable. And the OGL was what partially at least was an attempt by Wizards to get in front of that and to have the fandom say, you know what, we're never going to actually challenge that. We're just going to be happy to play in this yard that Wizards of the Coast has built for us. And this lawyer's standing there at Gen Con saying, guys, the yard does not exist. Just go be free. Um, and the attempt to revoke the OGL by Wizards, in addition to being a marketing disaster, or I should say a PR disaster. In addition to that, the very yard that they were trying to police, this guy would say didn't exist in the first place. And all it would take was someone to finally say, okay, I'm going to pay a lawyer to have this fought out in court and have
Yeah.
a judge say, well, pre-existing law says rules are not copyrightable, Wizards of the Coast. So your game, in fact, is not yours, which would definitely be a disaster for them. Um, not I've rambled off, but
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
but
I've heard that before. Of course, the people that are usually making that, the independent producers of small role-playing games generally don't have the kind of money to get into a legal battle like that, which is, I think, why both Wizards of the Coast or whomever probably has always, and the small communities have always strayed away from the litigation. I mean, did that ever come up when we had fourth edition and Paizo was making? Did Wizards of the Coast ever think about? I'm sure there's somebody out there, Wizards of the Coast. Ben, this is definitely like, I'd be so curious if you've spoken to anyone at Paizo who was ever like, yeah, we were always worried about Wizards of the Coast saying, no, you can't make Pathfinder. You're basically making 3.5 D&D.
so um
Oh, but it was under the OGL. Okay, right, right. Anyway, go ahead.
people, I'll tell you, people at Wizards uh did come to view Paizo as rivals.
Yeah.
People at Wizards, I'll I'll spare this person's identity, but one major player at Wizards once told me, I was very happy for the success of Paizo. Good for them. I just wish they did it with their own game instead of ours, um,
Hmm.
which is pretty salty. But the rise of Paizo is intimately linked to the OGL. Um, so there is all I say there's always been a faction that's against the OGL at Wizards. People at Wizards say that makes it sound too organized and too conspiratorial. So I'll change it to there's always been a group or some people at Wizards that think the OGL is a bad idea. And you can make that argument. That's fair. And with fourth edition, that group gained ascendancy for a moment. And they replaced the OGL with something called the GSL, the game system license, which is much more restrictive than the open gaming license. And uh, in addition to the problems inherent with the license itself, it also was produced in a very dilatory fashion. Um, Paizo was publishing adventures for 3.5
Yeah.
in Dungeon Magazine. They were the licensee for Dungeon Magazine,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they had subscribers, they had a publishing schedule that they had to meet. And my current understanding of the situation is that Wizards of the Coast was so late in getting Paizo uh, either a renewal for Dungeon or the GSL, I forget which, that Paizo had to make a decision. And that decision was, are we going to bank on we're publishing for fourth edition, which was plan A. They're like, they're switching to fourth edition, we're going to switch to fourth edition. That was the plan. Uh, but Wizards was so late in getting them the information they needed to do that that Paizo faced a choice. Either we delay, push back. We don't know what we're going to be publishing in 3 months. I forget how much time they needed to get things to the printer, but again, it's months. Um, we either push back and delay and lose our publishing rhythm, and who knows what that does to our bottom line sales as we stop putting out product for a while, and who knows what our subscribers are going to think, or we're publishing for 3.5. And Jason Bowman says, hey, I have some ideas about revising 3.5. I have this document here called Mon Mothma. And the people at Paizo, I'm going to say Lisa Stevens, but I assume that there were others involved in that decision. The people at Paizo say, okay, we're going to go with 3.5 and Jason's thing so that we don't lose our publishing rhythm and we don't not put out a product because that's bad for businesses. And here we go. And so that very attempt to squash the OGL directly led to Pathfinder's creation, Paizo embracing the OGL, and the ascendancy and rise of Paizo. Um, did that answer your question?
It is very much, and it's just so fascinating to listen to, and it brings me back to kind of my original point around this concept of like how we expect our communities in the tabletop role-playing game space to kind of share the same ethos around the games and have the same kind of love and interest and passion for them and see them as this kind of liberating mechanism rather than this kind of commercial product that we have to buy. Because if I ask every listener right now to close their eyes for just a second and I say Wizards of the Coast, actually that's probably better. If I say it's Hasbro, instantly I don't, everyone views the rich guy from Monopoly like running around with money coming out of his thing and trying to take it from you, trying to bankrupt you at Park Place. But if I ask you to close your eyes and I say, what do you think of when you say Paizo? Your your word connection will be like independent, fun, like
Purple Golem.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that the little logo is fantastic. But we have such a much more we think of Paizo as among us. And obviously that led to a lot of their success during the fourth edition slash 3 point, slash Pathfinder days. But I think it continues on, just despite the fact that obviously Pathfinder second edition is not sold in the same way as the D&D fifth edition has. But I do think that I think nobody holds their nose when buying a Paizo product because they feel like they're purchasing a product from their friend. Where when it comes to around to purchasing products now from Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast, it does feel icky. And I don't know whether that has any capital ramifications. I don't know if people are fine. I mean, geez, we still purchase from Amazon, and every time we make a purchase from Amazon, that comes with a little bit of conscientious twinge. But it still feels like we're buying in spite of ourselves. Or with Paizo, it feels like we're supporting something. I we're not supported by Paizo, but I don't play Pathfinder Second Edition. I've always wanted to. Um, but it doesn't seem like a game that unfortunately is being run as often. But it's funny, but I have all the books behind me, probably because it was so easy to buy the books because I feel so good around supporting Paizo. Anyway, I don't know where we're going with that, but it's interesting. I just think that the game is so, and I don't know, there's something about this entire practice of play that always feels so community based. And when somebody kind of insults the community, or when somebody fires the people that we like, or somebody doesn't get what Dungeons and Dragons is supposed to be, whether that's the creation of edition, which seems far from what we've been playing and doing, and how we were taught the game in 1983, to somebody trying to monetize this, turn it into a product when we don't want to think about it as a product, when we want to think about it as a liberatory mechanism rather than one that we're beholden to, that we have to make subscription prices. It offends us in some kind of deep-seated fashion.
So I think that one of the lessons of the history of Dungeons and Dragons is that corporations are ill-equipped to produce great creative works. And it's interesting to see that redounding in the film industry. It's interesting to see that redounding in comic books, and I think it's true. And again, someone can also say that's one of the most obvious things in the world. Perhaps that is so. And yet you do have great ages of corporate art. But I don't think we're living through one of them right now. And I think that D&D is a particularly thorny product for a limited liability corporation with a fiduciary obligation to its shareholders to produce because of the challenge you laid out, Scott, where we don't need those books.
Yeah.
So how are you going to make us buy them? Uh,
Yeah. It's a
and I actually I've been knocking around a solution to this in my head, and that is I think that we need a new kind of company. I don't, and this would be a great question for Brian Lewis of Azora Law, the person who actually wrote the open gaming license. I always say that there were three co-parents probably of the open gaming license. Uh, Scaff Elias, Ryan Dancy, and Brian Lewis. And you can argue all day long about, you know, who did what and who had a more important role, but I always toss those three names out. But Brian Lewis is essentially the gaming lawyer. There are other gaming lawyers, but they probably work for him at Azora Law in Washington State. Um, and I feel like we need a new kind of corporation, a new sort of corporate entity that will take artistic quality into account in a way that corporations do not. And we need some sort of a new corporate entity that will put an artist in charge instead of putting someone with a business degree in charge of an artist and telling them what to do. Because those are problems we see again and again and again and again and again. And it's why, like, one of the great, a part of you would think Wizards of the Coast has so many resources to throw at a role-playing game product that they will produce a better product than, say, Kelsey Dion. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, creator of Shadow Dark. And yet you have this odd sort of situation where the people with less resources actually seem to be doing better work than the people with more resources.
right.
Barkeep on the Borderlands, which is a staple bound zine, is better than a bunch of the stuff that Wizards of the Coast has put out, but not by a little, by a lot. Barkeep on the Borderlands is amazing. Go check out the second last episode of Plot Points if you want to hear me talk about it. Um, so we've been talking for a long time, and we have not opened the Dungeon Master's Guide. But go ahead and talk. Maybe I guess this is another episode where we never actually get to the DMG.
I know for all of these listening guys, this is the section we're about to hit to is just so exciting, and I tell you that so that you'll tune in next week. Um, no, I don't know. It's all fascinating, and again, it comes back to the initial question I have, which is there any other, is there any other game or I when I yesterday I was at a chess tournament and I was explaining why I'm going to Gary Con and what Gary Con is to somebody that doesn't has any knows what Dungeons and Dragons is. Is there anybody else out there that doesn't know what Dungeons and Dragons is? But every time you explain what Dungeons and Dragons, you explain, well, there's this convention that's named after the founder. It takes a few minutes to kind of explain like the passion that people have for this game, right? There certainly are poker conventions, but as you kind of mentioned, they are not conventions that celebrate the history of poker. But when you go to Gary Con, you celebrate the history, you celebrate the people that were part of it. If you look at it's the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons, and the guest list at Gary Con this year is crazy. I'm actually rather worried to go because I don't know if there's going to be any room in the hallways. And I mean just that from the guest list alone. There's so many people coming from, and also folks coming from, we've got a couple of folks that were part of Dave Arneson's campaign that are going to be there. It's, I don't know. It just engenders such a love, such a passion for what this has meant to so many people. And the interesting question that you bring up is, will this still be true in another 30 years? Maybe as we get farther away from the creation. But there is something, and maybe there's a strange little midlife crisis for folks like me. I mean, so many people have come. That's the other thing I always find interesting. So many people came back to the game in the last 10 years that are in my age group or slightly younger. So people rediscovering kind of what it meant when they were younger. And I've often made the argument that one of the reasons Dungeons and Dragons successes, and certainly Stranger, we've pointed already, it's Stranger Things, pandemic, bringing folks inside. But I'd also point to the concept that so many game elements are embedded within all of the applications that we use, and so many of the our post-human lives, there are mobile applications, have really kind of interpolated us the concept of game mechanics. So going back to Dungeons and Dragons, or even somebody that's new to Dungeons and Dragons actually knows a lot of these concepts. If you play Plants and Zombies, you probably have some idea of what basic strategy and tactics are. And more importantly, you understand concepts like hit points or the health bar. Obviously the rise of World of Warcraft, certainly also games like that, Skyrim, we can talk about them. Peter role-playing games has made people open to these mechanics, so that what was once rather these large barriers of mechanical complexity don't seem so complex because the basic lexicon of these games. So it's actually easy to get into a Dungeons and Dragons game if you've been playing Skyrim. And geez, how many thousands of people have gone that route, have gone CRPGs, which of course are borrowing a lot of the mechanics and the lexicon from these tabletop role-playing games. But so many people came to them not doing tabletop role-playing games. You and I, of course, came through tabletop role-playing games to CRPGs, but there's a lot of folks that went the opposite direction. It's all kind of fascinating. But before we forget, I did want to give a quick shout out to Sean Patrick Hopkins, which was the gentleman who read Slaying the Dragon to me.
And holy cow, he was remarkable. Again, one of the most frequent things I hear is people listen to him reading my work and start laughing in a good way. In
Yeah.
a good way. I really got to send him an email though, because holy cow, he did great. And I am looking at the Gary Con guest list right now, and geez
Right?
Louise, that's a long guest list, man. Huh. Wow.
Yeah, no, the other day I was like, it's crazy because there's some people that I've never had an opportunity to meet. By the way, I don't know if this episode is going to go out in time, but if it does, you and Ben and myself will be at GaryCon. We are going to be doing this podcast in a live format at the Galewood Room, if I'm not mistaken, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Do you recall what time that'll be? It's on Friday at
I'm pretty sure it's 6 or 7 o'clock.
Okay, cool. Cool, cool, cool. Um, and so yeah, this will go out that week. So if you are going to GaryCon and you want to check us out, please do. If you or else stop by and say hi, and we'll be wandering around. But yeah, holy cow, this is a crazy long list of people. I'm like, who do I need to dodge in the halls? Who do I need to hunt down and say hi to?
Yeah, I've never met the one person that I've always wanted to meet. And I last night we were talking about folks that we might want to invite on the show, and I don't want to give any spoilers to folks. One of those people is the person I've never met, and that's Errol Otis, and he's the one has done my favorite piece of Dungeons and Dragons art of all time, the Tom Moldvay set. Both what's the basic and then of course the expert set of those. He did both of the covers for those. Those are the most, to me, in many ways, the two most iconic pieces because that was the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons I've bought. But he's been at GaryCon for a while. I've never been able to track him down. But plot
Or
points, yeah. Excuse me.
go
Reading the
ahead.
DMG aloud. will be taking place in Galewood Room C at Friday at 1800 hours. And in civilian time, that will be 6 p.m. And as Ben mentioned, we are, folks are going to be able to, the last time we did this a few years ago, people were able to kind of shout out questions to us, which is really, really fun to get feedback in real time. And it's just so much fun to be in the place where Dungeons and Dragons was born. And I mean, Grand Geneva is such an amazing place. So
The
very much hoping
former
folks will come
Playboy
join us.
Club.
That's correct. And I was so fascinated to discover through somebody else reading Game Wizards to me that Dave Arneson was a member of the Playboy Club back then. Is there any? It's a heck of a way to end this
That is a heck
episode.
of a way to end this.
But just tell me in your mind, isn't that the strangest image that you can have in your head of Dave Arneson walking through a Playboy Club in the 1970s?
I mean, Ernie Gygax told me he would hang out outside the Playboy Club in the 1970s. So Dave Arneson's inside, Ernie Gygax is outside. I mean, there's not a lot going on in southern Wisconsin, so I would
Yeah.
imagine the Playboy Club was a uh I just see this shining beacon of sex in the rolling green hills.
And yeah, Lake Geneva, what a strange place for that to exist. I mean, the 1970s were a very, very, very different time. I mean, to be fair, when I was a kid, there was a Playboy Club. I went to high school in Omaha, Nebraska. There was a Playboy Club in Omaha, Nebraska.
Well, and you
So,
can argue all day long, like because Lake Geneva is in Wisconsin, but
mhm.
really, in many ways, it's a suburb of Chicago, an
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
extremely like uh there was a train line that went direct from Chicago to Lake Geneva. You didn't need to go through Milwaukee. Gary Gygax would take that train line into work in Chicago at one point. Um, so again, it's an odd thing. It is in Wisconsin, but perhaps not of Wisconsin. Although people from Lake Geneva can argue about that all day long. And again, like Skip Williams told me, yeah, Gary Gygax is from Lake Geneva, but we thought of him as from Chicago. So again, it's a weird thing.
That's really
Um,
interesting.
but all right, so in summary, hey, come join the Patreon so you can get on the Discord. I think I'm gonna try and write up little after interview reports with people that I interview, and post them on there. That's again a good reason to join. Um, at least when people say things that are interesting. I guess if I have an interview that's a real dud, I won't talk too much about that. But if you haven't got my book yet, Slaying the Dragon: The Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons, please do so. Scott, where can people contact you?
People can find me waiting in the waiting room of the, will somebody please run Pathfinder second edition for me? What, Ben, can you share one more time what our email addresses are through our new
So
podcast?
I am admin at readingdndallowed.net. That's admin at readingdndallowed.net. And to be honest, I forgot what I gave you. Did I give you Scott Bruner, SM Bruner?
I thought you said last week it was Scott at,
Let's
but
see
I
what
don't, yeah.
let's see. Well, we'll figure it out. Try Scott at readingdndallowed.net. And if it bounces back, let us know on
Yeah.
email me at admin at readingdndallowed.net. That I know is accurate and true.
Or just join the Patreon and tell us in live time on Discord.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, Scott, you have a great spring forward fall back Sunday.
You too, Ben. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. You have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye.